All right, so if we jump into ecosystems week number 4, because that's this week, and you kind of start scrolling down and looking at everything here. Obviously, if you are at home, this is the main slides for you, right? And that could be any of us at any time. We could be at home, and these are the slides that we need to look at. It tells us what we're going to do each day. Ecosystem study book. I haven't even talked about that yet, so should anybody be starting that? No. Science morning work. You all have a copy if you're here. If you're at home, there's the copy for you. Ecosystems 4, I gave anyone here that copy last Friday, correct? If you were at home, those are the vocabulary words for this week. I'm going to go ahead and let you know we are probably not going to have a vocabulary quiz on Friday. Due to the fact that we missed Monday, which is an entire day of instruction, and the fact that I'm trying to get you ready for the test on this next Monday, this coming up Monday, what is that, the 13th? I don't know that we're going to necessarily have to take a quiz. I only have to have 5 minors in science. We've already got like 3 or 4 already, so we're good. I'm not stressed about that. I also want to make sure that I've covered those words thoroughly before I give you a quiz. Good? All right. Ecosystem Study Guide is what I want you to click on. Normally, I would give you a hard copy of this, but since you don't get to take a hard copy in your hands, we're not going to have a hard copy in our hands today. So everybody should click on this right here. It will upload and should look something similar to this, right? Pretty close to this, yes? All right, is it 641909? Yeah. All right. And so you have, let me pause that. Oh my goodness. That's not good. I didn't have the whole screen there. So you should have something that looks similar to this, yes? That you can access. On your desk is a blank sheet of paper. Now, whether that's notebook paper, a blank piece of paper, doesn't matter what kind of paper that is. We are now going to pretend that we are just about to take a science test. Everybody feel good about that? One thing that happens to me, and I would imagine that it happens to a lot of us in here, you sit down, you start to take the test, and immediately you kind of start freaking out about things. Because you're like, oh, it's a test, I'm not ready for this, I'm nervous, and your mind starts to mess with you, and you start to forget things. I like to do something called a memory dump before I even take the test. Now, I warn some of you. A memory dump is when I start to write down all the stuff that I know before I take the test. But this is not something that Brandon's going to take an hour and a half writing down everything he knows and then he doesn't finish the test. Because that can't happen, can it? So when I'm looking at a memory dump, I might be looking at something like a blank sheet of paper. And I might say to myself, all right, biotic, abiotic, I know it. I don't need to sit there and jot all that stuff down. But what are the things that I get confused? Only I know that. Only you know the things that you get confused. So if I were in your shoes, and just to base it off what I've seen in class, one thing, Hayden, that would be on here is, if I can get the black, there we go. I would be talking about symbiosis. I'm not even looking at the test yet, right? So symbiosis. So I have mutualism, parasitism, and commensalism. Now I don't need to write down every last word in detail of the entire definition. So mutualism is both benefit, right? Parasitism is one and one hurt. And commensalism is one, and one gets nothing. Mr. Bullen, one and one nothing doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't have to make sense to you. It has to make sense to me because I'm the person that's using my notes, right? It doesn't make sense to Veda. Well, that doesn't matter what she writes if it doesn't make sense to you because you shouldn't be looking at her paper, right? You're writing this down so that you understand it. Now, if I say mutualism, I remember this. This is a bee and a flower. Parasitism is a tick and a dog. And commensalism is the shark and the remora. There we go. I jotted it down. I did a memory dump onto the paper. I dumped my brain out onto the paper so that when I get foggy about it later because I get nervous, it's right there. What are some other things that we've kind of mixed up in class? Let's be honest. Exactly. endangered, threatened, and extinct. Now, I know extinct means no more. Threatened means almost. Endangered. And endangered means almost extinct. If you look at the definition of those words, my definition is pretty close, right? Even though it's super short. Endangered species, a species that's in danger of becoming extinct, that means they're almost extinct. Short, concise, right? Now, if I'm looking at the rest of the data, and again, only you know what you are struggling on. I might be done memory dumping. And if I was going to be memory dumping for the whole class, these are the two big things that we mess up. Maybe I need to talk about a food chain, and then kind of remind myself, if bugs go up, grass down, if hawks go down, snakes up. Just kind of remind myself about that, right? Feel good about that? Memory dump. This is not for everybody. I don't expect to walk around the room and see everybody doing this. Probably about 25% of the class, but it's really going to make a huge difference with the people that use that tool of using a memory dump, because sometimes you just forget things. Feel good about memory dumping? It may be for you, Shayla. It may not. You will know that immediately when you take the test on Monday. So we're looking at this page, right? Everybody has this page pulled up? So number 1 says the food web includes grass, grasshoppers, moss, and mushrooms, which is identified as a consumer. So, on my blank piece of paper, that's like the main vocabulary word in that, right? What is a consumer? So, what is a consumer, class? Dawson says something that eats. That could be an herbivore, carnivore, or an omnivore, right? Correct? We go back. A food web includes grass, grasshoppers, moss, and mushrooms, which is identified as a consumer. Which of these 4 things eats? Does grass eat? Does moss eat? Do mushrooms eat? But grasshoppers do eat grass, so your answer is B, grasshopper. Mr. Bullens, you just spent like 2 or 3 minutes on one question. Is that a normal amount of time? Yes. If you're annotating and doing what you're supposed to do, absolutely, that is a normal amount of time. Question 2. Where are producers located on a food chain? Okay, I go back because I remember doing a memory dump of a food chain, didn't I? Where is the producer in all of this? Maddox says it's here. Let's draw another one just to make sure that it's always first, right? So we'll say acorns, squirrel, to owl. Are they first? Yes. So you go back and you look at this, and you know that the answer is A at the beginning. Why? Because they make their own food. They're not in the middle. Don't let those things confuse you. They're not at the end. They don't rely on other organisms. Other organisms rely on them, and they don't change their position depending on what they are eating. They don't eat. They're not consumers. Good? So far, do you see how I'm interacting with the questions and highlighting things and writing things down on my paper? Because I'm looking at a whole bunch of pieces of paper in here and they're all blank. Because you're going to be having to do this in just a minute on your own. All All right, let's go to the next question. Question 3. In a food web, Max, is there any reason why anyone should draw this entire food web out on their paper? I don't need to see it drawn. I don't need to see all the words with everything connected because it says which organisms are producers. So I go back to my blank sheet of paper. Whoops. Producers are plants. Producers make their own food. Right? Anything wrong about what I wrote? No, because I'm interacting with the test in this food web, which are the things that make their own food. Well, I look down. Is it a frog and a rat? Rat and leaves. Well, one of those does. Leaves and berries. Those are the only things that come from plants. And now I've interacted with that part of the test. Does that make sense to everyone in here? Veda, can you see how I'm looking at the questions? I'm highlighting the words that are vocabulary words that we've had in class. I'm defining them, and then I'm using the answers to see which one makes the most sense. It's a very difficult thing to do for the first few times, I promise. A brown bear eats a variety of foods. They eat berries, insects, and animals. Okay, I go back to my blank sheet of paper. So a bear eats berries and animals. And I think to myself, I've talked about that before. It's a consumer of some sort because it eats, right? And do you notice, Hayden, how I've already talked about this up here? I know that this one eats plants, this one eats meat, this one eats both. So the answer for bear is, you mean, Mr. Bones, you can actually go back and use your notes that you wrote down to answer other questions? Yeah, because you're not bringing in notes from home. These are blank notes that you've written once you got the test. Of course you can use that. Make sense? Okay, so I go to number 5, and it says, which organism would be eaten last in a food chain? Can you imagine what Mr. Bullens would have felt like had he not done a memory dump earlier? Right? Because there's already been 2 food chain questions. So I go back into my notes that I wrote from my memory dump. What is, and I look at my question, what is last in a food chain? Well, it's certainly not producers. Are decomposers. Like, I have to think to myself, what is a decomposer? So if I'm looking at this, so decomposers, they break things down, right? You can put soil in parentheses. So, I put an L on that, did I? I don't think it's decomposers either, do you? Fabiana, what do you think? Can't be decomposers because they're not really in the food chain, are they? They're everywhere on the food chain. So I have to ask myself this. Is it a first level consumer or a second level consumer? And then that kind of sparks something in my head. I say, this takes me back to this. You have your producers, first level consumers, second level consumer, third level consumer, and if you get to it, your fourth or your quaternary consumer. So what would be eaten last in this instance? Is it your first or your second level consumer? It's the second level consumer. This is your herbivores. That's typically the first thing eaten, isn't it? I mean, after the grass, like the first animal eaten. So last would be your second level consumer. And you're ready to move on. All right, I'm going to stop there with you. Now it is time for you to kind of practice with me and on your own. Feel good? If you're at home watching this, make sure you send me some messages on Dojo or in the Google Classroom or email me or something so I can answer those and we can get those questions settled up before we get to next Monday.